You think sitting at home all day makes you a businesswoman? That's the most delusional thing I've ever heard. My husband said that on a Tuesday morning, while I was still in my pajamas, laptop open on the kitchen counter, half a cup of coffee going cold beside me. He didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. I didn't respond. There wasn't much point. My name is Tara Weston, and I was 31 years old when my husband decided I had become an embarrassment to him. To be fair, he hadn't always felt that way. When we first got married, he thought it was charming that I wanted to start my own thing. He'd pat my shoulder and say, "Sure, babe, go for it," the way you encourage a child drawing pictures and calling it a business plan. He never took it seriously. I don't think he took me seriously. Not really. Not anymore. What he knew was this. I had left my corporate marketing job, 2 years into our marriage, to build a skincare brand from our second bedroom. I mixed formulas on the kitchen table. I photographed products on a cutting board with white poster board as a backdrop. I ran ads with a budget so small it would make most people laugh. I shipped orders myself, sometimes at 11 at night, sometimes right after making dinner, sometimes both. What he didn't know, what I had stopped trying to tell him, was that it was working. The silence between us on that topic had grown so wide and so deep that it had become its own kind of wall. Early on, I used to give him updates, monthly revenue, new wholesale inquiries, a feature on a beauty blog with decent traffic. He'd nod without looking up from the TV. When I got our first retail account, a small boutique chain in the Pacific Northwest, I told him over dinner, excited, a little breathless. He said, "That's cool," and asked if I'd seen where he put the TV remote. After a while, I stopped sharing. It was easier that way. His career, on the other hand, was something we discussed constantly. He worked in commercial real estate, wore good suits, took clients to expensive restaurants, and came home talking about deals with a particular energy that made it clear. He found himself fascinating. His friends were similar. Big personalities, firm handshakes, wives who worked either high-status jobs or no jobs at all. I didn't fit neatly into either category. At dinner parties, when people asked what I did, he'd answer before I could. "She runs a little online shop." He'd smile while he said it. A dismissive, affectionate, utterly condescending smile. Like I was a hobbyist. Like I sold macrame plant hangers on Etsy. I smiled along. I didn't correct him. But something was shifting. Slowly, quietly, the way a tide changes. You don't notice until the water is somewhere completely different than where it started. My brand, Ivory North, had been growing steadily for 3 years. What started as a small batch line of 3 moisturizers had expanded into 14 SKUs, including 2 serums that had developed something of a cult following in online skincare communities. We had a subscription customer base that renewed at nearly 80% month over month. We had wholesale relationships with boutiques in 12 states. I had hired 4 people to help with operations and fulfillment out of a small warehouse I leased in a business park 20 minutes from our house. My husband had driven past that warehouse at least twice. He'd never asked whose it was. The breaking point came at his firm's annual summer dinner. It was held at a private event space downtown, the kind of place with dramatic lightings and servers who replace your napkin every time you stand up. His colleagues brought their wives. Everyone was dressed well. I wore a navy dress I'd owned for 2 years and spent the entire ride over listening to him critique my earrings. Too large, apparently. During cocktail hour, one of his senior partners, a man named Bill, or possibly Phil, I could never remember, made a joke I wasn't expecting. "So, Tara," he said, swirling his drink with the ease of a man who had never once doubted himself. "I hear you sell face cream on the internet." A few people nearby laughed softly. My husband laughed too. I felt the flush rise up my neck and forced it down. "Something like that," I said. My husband shook his head a little, like I was being modest. "She putters around with it," he said. "Keeps herself busy." He put a hand on my back and squeezed once, which I think was meant to be affectionate, but landed like a period at the end of a sentence that dismissed everything I had built. I stood there holding my sparkling water, and I thought very clearly. I'm done explaining myself to these people. We left the dinner early because my husband had a headache. On the way home, he mentioned that Bill, it was definitely Bill, thought I should think about doing something more structured. He said this as a kindness, as advice being passed along from someone who knew better. I looked out the passenger window at the city lights smearing past in the dark. I'll take that under consideration, I said. He didn't hear the frost in it. 2 weeks later, I signed the paperwork for a new office space in a 10-story building in the financial district. We'd outgrown the warehouse arrangement. The operations team needed a proper headquarters. I had also just finalized conversations with a regional department store chain. 300 locations, a real purchase order, the kind of thing that changes what a company is and what it can become. I didn't tell my husband not to be mysterious, not to plan some dramatic reveal. I just didn't. I had tried telling him things for years, and the information had nowhere to go when it reached him. It dissolved. So I stopped carrying it in his direction. The morning I moved the last of my things from the second bedroom, my original workspace, with the sticky residue on the desk from 3 years of sample labels. He was getting ready for work. He saw me carrying a box out to the car. "Spring cleaning?" he asked. "Sure," I said. He left for work without asking anything else. The next 3 weeks were the most focused I had been in years. I set up the office, onboarded the new department store account, hired 2 additional team members, and started conversations with a packaging supplier who could scale with us, if the velocity was what I projected it would be. The company had moved from something I managed from my kitchen into something that had its own gravity, its own momentum. My husband and I existed in a kind of polite parallel. He talked about his deals. I listened. I didn't talk about mine. We ate dinner together most nights. We were fine. We were also 2 people who had slowly stopped seeing each other clearly. Then something happened that I hadn't planned for. His firm landed a partnership with a skincare and wellness brand, looking to expand into commercial retail space. They needed someone local who understood both the market and the industry. His senior partner, Bill, reached out directly to Ivory North. He didn't know the connection. Why would he? My husband had never mentioned my company by its actual name to anyone in his professional life. His assistant called my office line and spoke to my operations manager, Kendra. She scheduled a meeting for the following Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. When my husband came home that evening, he was in a good mood. The skincare company deal, he said, was a big one. The firm stood to make significant commission from the real estate arrangements. He was hoping to be the lead on it. He told me all about it over pasta, gesturing with his fork, energized in that particular way he got when money was close. I nodded. I asked clarifying questions. I kept my face completely neutral the entire time. I had recognized the company name immediately. It was a competitor, a much larger, older brand that had been trying to move into direct retail for years. We'd crossed paths at a trade show 18 months ago. The fact that they were now working through my husband's firm to secure commercial space was a remarkable coincidence. But the meeting on Thursday had nothing to do with them. The meeting on Thursday was between his firm's commercial leasing team and Ivory North to discuss space in 3 additional markets. I called Kendra that night after my husband went to bed and told her to leave the calendar invite exactly as it was. Thursday came. I got to the office early. I had a full morning of calls. Then lunch with a contract attorney. Then the afternoon was blocked for the 2 o'clock. Kendra had set the conference room up properly. Printed materials on the table, water glasses, the Ivory North brand wall visible through the glass. At 2 o'clock, I heard the elevator. I was standing near the window reviewing notes on my tablet when the door opened. My husband walked in first, mid-sentence, talking to a colleague. He didn't look up immediately. Then he did. The sentence he was stopped. Not tapered off. Stopped. Like someone had cut a wire. He stood in the doorway of my conference room, in my office, on a floor with my company's name on the wall in 3-inch letters. And he looked at me the way a person looks when the ground shifts and they haven't caught up to it yet. I smiled. "Hi. Come on in." His colleague, a younger man I didn't recognize, looked between us, uncertain. Kendra smoothly guided them both to the chairs across the table. I sat down. I opened my folder. I led the meeting. For 45 minutes, I presented market expansion data, discussed lease requirements in Austin, Denver, and Nashville, answered questions from the colleague about floor specifications and timeline. My husband sat across from me and did not say a word that wasn't a direct answer to something I asked him. At one point, his colleague mentioned that Ivory North's growth trajectory was unusual for a founder-led brand at this stage. It is, I said. We've been very deliberate. I didn't look at my husband when I said it. When the meeting ended, his colleague shook my hand enthusiastically and said he'd have proposed lease terms to Kendra by end of week. He walked out talking on his phone. My husband stayed in his chair. The conference room emptied. The door drifted half-closed behind Kendra, who had the good instinct to give us a moment. He was looking at the brand wall, at the framed press coverage, at the team photo from our holiday party last December, 12 people, including me, standing in front of a wall of product in the warehouse. Tara, he said finally. I waited. He looked back at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something in his face that wasn't confidence, wasn't dismissal, wasn't performance. It was the look of a man who was recalculating everything. How long has this been here? He asked. The office? 4 weeks. The company? I paused. 5 years. He was quiet. I drove past a warehouse, he said slowly. On Culver. I always wondered. That was ours, I said, for 2 years. He looked at the table. He was wearing the blue tie I had given him for his birthday 2 years ago. That detail came to me clearly, and I wasn't sure what to do with it. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. I had thought about how I might answer that question if it ever came. I had imagined myself saying something cutting, something that would land the way his careless words had landed on me over and over again. But sitting across from him in that conference room, I didn't feel the anger I expected. I felt something quieter. Something that had already made peace with the distance between us. I tried, I said. For a long time, I tried. He started to say something. You told your colleagues I put it around, I said. Not with heat. Just clearly. You told Bill I sold face cream on the internet, and you laughed when he laughed. You answered for me at every dinner party for 4 years. You told me that my work wasn't structured. His jaw tightened, not in anger, in recognition. I wasn't hiding this from you, I continued. I just stopped walking things over to you after you made it clear you weren't going to look at them. The room was very quiet. The boutique chain in the Northwest, I said. Do you remember when I told you about that? He shook his head slightly. You asked where the TV remote was. He closed his eyes. I wasn't performing. I wasn't delivering a speech I'd rehearsed. These were just things that were true, said plainly, in the order they came to me. I built something real, I said. I needed you to at least be curious. I didn't need you to understand every detail. I just needed you not to dismiss it before I got to the third sentence. He was quiet for a long moment. This skincare company we're doing the other deal with, he said. They're competition for you? Some overlap, yes. He laughed once, not a happy laugh, a complicated one. I came in here to close a deal that would have helped your competitor take space in markets you're trying to enter. I know. And you let the meeting get scheduled. I wanted to see what would happen, I said. He looked at me differently then. I'm not sure exactly what shifted, but something did. I owe you an apology, he said. A real one. Not the kind where I say sorry and then we order takeout and move on. I looked at him. I don't know if I realized how much I was doing it, he said. The dismissing, I think I just. He paused. I thought I was being realistic. I thought I was protecting you from getting your hopes up. I know what you thought, I said. But protecting someone and believing in them aren't the same thing. He didn't argue. He couldn't, because it was true. Kendra knocked softly and opened the door. Tara, you have a 4 o'clock call in 10. Thank you, I said. I'll be right there. My husband stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked around the office one more time. At the window with the downtown view. At the bookshelves with the industry awards and trade publications. at the framed original label from the very first moisturizer I ever made, which I had kept because it reminded me of where everything started. At the door, he stopped. "The TV remote thing," he said quietly. "I'm sorry about that specifically." I almost smiled. That's a start. After he left, I sat back down for exactly 4 minutes before my next call. The city outside the window was going about its afternoon the way cities do. Indifferent, continuous, full of its own momentum. I thought about who I had been 2 years ago. Eating dinner and trying to figure out how to explain my quarterly numbers to a man whose eyes glazed over before I finished the first sentence. I thought about the second bedroom and the poster board and the 11 o'clock shipping runs and all the Tuesday mornings I had sat at the kitchen counter in my pajamas, building something while someone told me it wasn't real. I didn't feel triumphant. That's the part that surprised me. There was no rush of vindication, no satisfaction in having been proved right. What I felt was something closer to tired. And also clear. The way you feel when you've been carrying something heavy for a long time and you finally put it down somewhere permanent. What happened between my husband and me after that is its own long story, one that didn't resolve in a single conversation or a single afternoon. Trust isn't rebuilt the way furniture is rearranged. Quickly, visibly, with immediate results. It takes longer. It requires more honesty than most people expect and more patience than most people plan for. What I know is this. The version of me who sat silently at that dinner party while a man named Bill laughed at my work. She doesn't exist anymore. Not because my husband walked into my conference room and had to reckon with what I'd built, but because a long time before that, somewhere between the kitchen counter and the warehouse and the 14 SKUs and the 300 location purchase order, I had stopped needing anyone to confirm that the work was real. That was when I became someone who could run a meeting, shake a hand, lead a company, and sit across from her husband in a glass-walled conference room and say the true things simply and without apology. Success was never about proving him wrong. It was about building something so completely, so honestly, so stubbornly, that the question of whether someone else believed in it became, quietly, finally, irrelevant.